The dark in Dome 4 was not the dark I grew up with. It had a color down low near the grating, a blue so pale it barely counted as light, and it moved when nothing else did. I stood with my back against the cold curve of the hull, and I held still. Nadia's fingers rested in my palm, not gripping, just there, 2 fingers laid across the heel of my hand, because Boone had told us while the lights were still on that touch was allowed as long as it never moved. A hand that already lay somewhere was part of the room. A hand that reached was a hand you could find. The floor had a pulse in it. That was the part I never got used to, in the whole of it. A slow hydraulic knock came up through the grating and into the soles of my boots and up the long bones of my legs, and it was not the pumps, because the pumps were dead. It kept the time of a heart, slowed almost to stopping. Between the knocks, the blue light on the grating swelled and thinned, and I understood without wanting to that the light and the knock were the same thing, and that the thing they belonged to was in the room with us. Water dripped somewhere off to my left. A long wet drop, and then a wait, and then another, and under the dripping came the sound I still hear when a room is too quiet. A drag. Something heavy and soaked pulling itself over metal, unhurried, the way a soaked hawser drags coming up over a gunnel. Except this coil was the size of the walkway, and it had a smell, cold and mineral and old, like the inside of a chest freezer that lost power a month back and was only now being opened. Do not breathe sharp. That was the other rule. A sudden pull of air moved the chest, and the chest had muscle in it, and muscle, when it fired, made the small electric flicker the thing swam toward. So I breathed the way I did as a kid, pretending to be asleep with someone standing in the doorway. Long, shallow, nothing behind it. The blue crept up the door seam across from me, found the gasket, pushed against it. For a second, the whole seam glowed like a wire under load, and I could see the 3 of us lit in it. Nadia, to my right, with her eyes shut and her jaw set. Boone farther down, with both hands flat against the bulkhead and his chin on his chest. Old man's hands, ropey and shaking, and he was fighting the shake the way a body fights a shiver from the inside, telling the muscle to lie. I had 180 days on my contract. It should have been 179. That is the whole of how I came to be, standing in the dark 11,000 feet down with a blind thing feeling the water for the twitch of me. The order of it mattered. It always mattered to the company, the order and the count. In the end, the count was the only thing about any of us they got right. The last shuttle left Trench Station 9 on a Thursday, and I watched it go. I watched it on the monitor in the mustering bay in Dome 4. A gray shape lifting off the dock ring with its running lights strobing, tilting nose up into the black, and then gone. Swallowed so fast, it was like a coin dropped down a well. The camera lost it in under 4 seconds. There was nothing to see after that but the dock lights, and the great dark past them, and the slow snow of marine detritus, drifting up through the beams, always up, always the same, day and night. That did not exist down there. I stood and I watched the empty water where the shuttle had been, and I did the math again, even though I had done it 11 times since the manifest came through. 180 days. My contract with Aegis Deep Sea Resources ran 179. That number was the job. I was a systems engineer, which at Trench Station 9 meant I kept the environmental stack and the pressure telemetry and the 24 daisy-chained processors that ran the domes from choking on their own errors. And I did it on a fixed-term, deep hazard contract that paid better than anything I had ever signed my name to, and paid it for exactly 179 days, not 180. There was a reason for the one that was missing, and the reason was money, and I knew the reason going in and took the money anyway. At 180 days, a deep hazard posting crossed a line in a federal insurance schedule that I never read and never needed to, because everyone on the station could tell you what it did without reading it. At 180 days, the company had to carry a costlier grade of coverage on the people down there. Long-duration hazard, they called it. It cost them. So the contracts came in at 179, every one of them, driller and cook and medic and engineer. And the transport schedule was built around getting the whole roster up and out before that line got crossed. And it worked like a clock for years, because a clock is a cheap thing to run when nobody ever has to fix it. I had 4 days left when the filing error happened. I did not know it was happening. Nobody did. Somewhere in an office I never saw, in a city I will not name because it does not deserve to be attached to this, a crew rotation got keyed into the wrong quarter, and my name and 2 others slid off the Thursday manifest and onto a manifest for a transport that did not exist, a phantom pickup dated 11 days out. By the time the mistake surfaced, if it ever really surfaced at all, and was not just left to rot in a queue, the Thursday shuttle was already a coin down a well, and I was standing in the mustering bay at day 176 with the wrong number climbing toward me. I took the posting for the reason most men take a posting like it. I owed money, and I had a daughter I was not doing right by, and the 2 facts were braided together the way those 2 facts always are. Her name is Lena. She was 9 the winter I signed the ages papers, and she would be 10 before I surfaced. And I told myself I was doing it for her, which was true. And I also told myself she would understand it that way someday, which I have stopped believing. Her mother and I had not been together in 6 years. I sent money. I was good at sending money. It was the one part of fatherhood I could do from 11,000 feet down, and I did it, and I called it love and mailed it in. There was a voicemail on my personal handset that I never returned. Lena left it the week before I shipped out. She was calling to tell me she made a swim team, the words coming fast and proud the way kids do when they have practiced the call in their head. And there was a pause at the end where she waited for me to be there, and I was not, because I was in a hotel near the staging port with my phone face down on the nightstand, working up the nerve to do exactly the thing I was about to do. I saved the voicemail. I did not call back. I meant to call back from the station when I was settled, when I had something to say that was not just an apology, and 176 days went by, and I never did. It is a small thing to carry. I have found there is no floor under how small a thing can be and still bear all the weight a man sets on it. The station itself I can describe with my eyes closed, and often do, at 3 in the morning, when describing it is better than the alternative. Trench Station 9 sat at the lip of the Aleutian Trench, in the far cold reach of the North Pacific, anchored over a fissure in the sea floor that leaked heat the way a cracked stove leaks it. That heat was the whole reason for us. The company drilled the geothermal for power and pulled minerals out of the vent chimneys that grew like black antlers down in the dark, and the station was strung together to serve the drilling. And it was built the cheapest way that would hold. Picture a stack. 4 steel domes threaded like beads down a single central conduit that ran from the sea floor up toward the surface it never reached. A spine of pipe and lift shaft and cable 11,000 feet down, in water cold enough to stop a heart in 90 seconds, and heavy enough to fold a truck flat. Dome 1 sat at the bottom, closest to the floor and the vent. The rig, the drill deck, and the heat exchangers, the loudest and hottest and lowest place on the station, where men worked in a permanent iron roar with the sea floor a few dozen feet under their boots, through a viewport the men learned not to look through. Dome 2 was processing and waste, the ore crushers and the settling tanks and the storage for everything the crushing left behind, a sour chemical place. We held our breath crossing it when we could. Dome 3 was where we lived, quarters and the mess and the sick bay and the little rec space with its one screen and its ping-pong table with no net. 200 and some feet of walkway and bunk and folding chair that we called home, the way a place becomes home when no other place is on offer. Dome 4 was the top. Command, the comm suite, the environmental core I rode herd on, and the dock. The mustering bay and the shuttle ring and the 2 emergency escape pods and the heavy pressure doors that sealed the whole column off from the world. Dome 4 was where we came from and where we left from, and in between we did not think about it, because thinking about the surface was a good way to lose the ability to work. 11,000 feet of water on top of all of it, pressing in on every seam and gasket and weld with a patience that never once let up, and the whole stack humming with the pumps that kept us dry and breathing. A hum we stopped hearing after the first week and would have died inside of 30 minutes without. Ray Teller was the first of us the trench took, and he was a great deal more than the thing that took him. He ran a drill crew in Dome 1. He was 51 and built like a fire hydrant, and he had been going down into the deep for pay since he was 19 years old. Oil first, and then this. And he had the flattened calm of a man who had made his peace long ago with dying at work and simply chose not to dwell on it. He kept a photograph of a bass boat taped inside his locker. Not his wife, not his kids, a boat, a used aluminum thing he was saving to buy outright so he could quit the deep and fish the Kenai until he died in the sun. He talked about that boat the way other men talked about heaven. He was 3 postings from having it. He told me the number every time we sat down to cards. 3 more, and he was out. 3 more, and it was the boat and the river and nobody's clock but his own. Teller and I played gin most nights in the Dome 3 mess because neither of us slept right that far down. He cheated a little and let me catch him, so I would think that was the only way he cheated. He was the one who taught me the thing everybody learned eventually, which was to stop fighting the hum and start using it. To let the pumps be the sound of my own blood, so the silence when a pump cycled did not put me through the ceiling. He was kind to me in the offhand way of men who do not have a word for it. When the manifest came through and I saw my name was not on the Thursday shuttle, Teller was the first person I told. And he looked at the number for a long time and did not make it into a joke, which was how I knew it was bad. "You are being screwed," he said. "That is all this is. Some pencil pusher fat-fingered a date, and now the company would rather leave you down here 11 days than admit it in writing." He set his cards down. He said, "We will raise the surface tomorrow and get it fixed. It is a filing thing. Filing things get fixed." I believed him because he believed it, or because he was good enough to look like he did. He had 11 days left himself, same as the Phantom Manifest said I did, and he was not on the Thursday shuttle either, and neither was a young waste tech named Ostrander who I barely knew. He was maybe 23 on his first deep contract, and he had a way of eating alone in the mess with a paperback propped against the napkin holder. And the one time I sat with him, he told me he had taken the posting to pay off a truck and see the ocean, and that it had not once occurred to him until he got down here that the ocean and the sea were not the same thing, and that he had not seen the sky in months and missed it more than he thought a person could miss a thing that was just always there. I wish I had sat with him more than the once. 3 of us slid off the real transport and onto the ghost one. Teller, Ostrander, me. The company had, by the arithmetic of it, decided that the 3 of us were cheaper to strand than to correct, though I did not let myself think it in those words that first week. That first week, I still thought in the words Teller used, "filing thing gets fixed." The morning after the shuttle left, I went up to the comm suite in Dome 4 with the station chief to raise the surface and start the process of getting fixed. The station chief was a man named Halbrook. It would be easy to make him the villain of this, and doing it lets the real thing off the hook. Halbrook was not cruel. He was a company man in the way a bolt is a company bolt, torqued to spec and holding the load it was told to hold and incapable of imagining a load outside the spec. He had a family photo on his console, and he asked after mine, and he meant it. He was also, from the first morning, the mouth the company spoke through, and by the end I could not always tell where Halbrook stopped and the company started, and I do not think, near the finish, that Halbrook could either. We raised the surface at 0800. The relay took the better part of a minute each way, that far down, so a conversation had the stop and wait rhythm of talking to a man on the moon. Halbrook logged the error. He read out my name and Teller's and Ostrander's and the contract dates and the shuttle we missed. The voice on the other end, a scheduling officer whose name I never got, took it all down, and said the words, "I would come to know the shape of the way I know the shape of a stone in my shoe." We show that as processed. Your rotation is scheduled. Sit tight. Scheduled for when? Halbrook asked. There was the long wait of the relay. Then, we show that as processed. Standby transport is being coordinated. We will advise. That was the first of them. We show that as processed. It came back over the next days in a dozen small variations, each one built to sound like an answer and shaped so that it was not being coordinated. Under review. Flagged for the next available window. I was an engineer. I knew the difference between a system doing a thing and a system printing a message that said it was doing a thing while nothing turned over underneath. I started to hear that difference in the voices from the surface about a week before I had the sense to be afraid of it. Stand by, they said. We will advise. Those few days had a terrible ordinary quality to them that I did not appreciate at the time and have missed every day since. We still ran shifts. I still walked the environmental core twice a day and logged the scrubber banks and traded shift with a hydraulics tech who complained about her knees. Teller still ran his crew down in Dome 1, still came up to the mess at the end of it smelling of hot iron and machine oil, still dealt the cards. We played gin those nights the same as always, and he still let me catch him palming, and once that last stretch, he caught me looking at the photograph of the bass boat taped in his open locker, and he did not make a joke of it. He said, "When I get her, you and your girl are coming up to the Kenai, and I am going to teach that kid to fish." And I said, "Sure, Ray," and I meant it, and he meant it, and neither of us knew we were making a plan with a dead man. We spent those quiet days the way people spend the last of anything they do not know is the last of it, carelessly, on small talk and card games and complaints about knees. And I would give a great deal to have them back and spend them exactly the same, because spending them any other way would have meant knowing, and knowing that early would have been its own kind of drowning. And for a few days, nothing happened. That was the last of the ordinary the station ever gave us, before the count started going the other way. Before it stopped being days, I had left and became a different kind of counting entirely. The kind the thing in the trench had been doing, patient as the water, since long before any of us signed a page. The roar from Dome 1 never stopped. The drill ran in shifts around a clock that meant nothing that far down, and the heat exchangers ran always, and the sound of all of it came up the spine of the station. As a low iron grinding we felt in our fillings more than heard. It was the sound of the money being made. It was the reason the rest of us were fed and pressurized and kept from turning to paste. On the fourth night after the shuttle left, at some hour past 2 in the morning, it stopped. I was awake for it. I had not been sleeping much since the manifest, and I was lying in my bunk in Dome 3 doing the thing I did when I could not sleep, which was to run the environmental readouts in my head, cycle by cycle, the way a man says a rosary. The scrubber banks, the pressure differentials between the domes, the pump stack. I was somewhere in the middle of that when the roar went out from under everything, and the silence that came up in its place was so total and so wrong that I sat straight up in the dark with my heart going before my mind had caught up to why. The pumps were still running. I made myself find them in the quiet, the near hum I could feel in the frame of the bunk, and they were there. We were still breathing. We were still dry. It was only the roar that had died. Only Dome 1. I got dressed and went up the spine to the comm suite. Halbrook was already there in a t-shirt with his hair flat on one side, and Nadia was at the board. Nadia Sorrell ran comms and data for the station, which meant the telemetry and the logs and the long, thin thread of relay that tied us to a world we could not see. She was maybe 35, quiet, with the specific unshakability of a person who has spent her working life being the one who has to stay calm on the radio while other people come apart. We were friends, the way people become friends in a place with no exits, fast and without ceremony. She was the one who told me that first night the roar died, that Dome 1 had gone off the board entirely. Not a fault, not a warning, off. Power, comms, telemetry, life support monitoring, all of it flatlined at the same instant, which is not how anything real fails. Real things fail one system at a time and scream about each one. Dome 1 had simply stopped being on the network, the way a name stops being on a list. Halbrook raised the surface. The relay crawled out and crawled back, and the voice that came down had an answer ready so fast that the answer had to have been written before the question, and that was the first moment I felt the floor of the thing tilt under me. Dome 1 is experiencing a geological event, the voice said. Seismic activity consistent with vent instability. The Dome 1 crew has been evacuated to Dome 2 via the secondary cargo lift as a precaution. All personnel accounted for. Stand by for further advisement. Halbrook read it back to make sure he had it. All personnel accounted for. Evacuated via the secondary cargo lift. He wrote it in the log in his neat block capitals. He looked relieved. He looked like a man handed a reason to stop being afraid, and I saw him take it, and I did not say anything yet, because I did not yet have the shape of what was wrong. I only had the feeling, and a feeling does not go in a log, but I was a systems engineer, and the secondary cargo lift was a system, and systems keep books whether anyone reads them or not. I went back down to my station in Dome 3, where the maintenance telemetry lived, and I pulled the lift logs. Every lift on the station wrote a line every time it moved. Car position, load cell, motor draw, door cycles, time stamped to the second. It was the dullest data on the station, and nobody looked at it from 1 month to the next, which is exactly why it could not lie. A man can lie. A load cell that reads the weight of 11 men stepping into a car cannot lie because it does not know it is being asked a question. The secondary cargo lift had not moved in 9 days. Not that night. Not that week. The last line in its log was a routine ore transfer from before the shuttle even left, and after that, nothing. No car movement, no door cycle, no load, no draw. The motor had not turned over once. Whatever had happened to the Dome 1 crew, they had not ridden the secondary cargo lift up to Dome 2, because the secondary cargo lift had sat dead in its shaft the entire time, and I was the only person on the station looking at the one number that said so. I sat with that for a long while. I did not think that night that a thing had come up out of the trench and taken 11 men. I thought the company was lying. That was all, and it was enough. I thought some scheduler or safety officer far above us had decided that the truth about Dome 1 was more expensive than a comfortable story, and had written the comfortable story and expected no one down here to check the plumbing of it. I thought about Teller, 3 more postings in the boat. I thought about the load cell reading 0, and about 11 men who were somewhere other than where the surface said they were. And I felt the specific, sick cold of a man who has just understood that the people responsible for keeping him alive have started managing him instead. I took it to Halbrook the next morning. I laid the log in front of him, the flat deadline of it, and I told him what it meant. The car has not moved in 9 days, I said. Nobody wrote it anywhere. Wherever the Dome 1 crew is, they did not go up. The surface is telling us a thing the machine says did not happen. Halbrook looked at the log for a long time. I will give him this. He did not laugh it off. He was not a stupid man. He read the numbers and he understood them, and I saw the understanding go across his face, and then I saw him decide, the way I have watched men keep walking on a leg they know is broken, because stopping is worse. Maybe the log is wrong, he said. Telemetry drops. You know that better than I do. Maybe they used the personnel lift and the tag got fouled. He was already reaching for reasons, and the reasons were not crazy. That was the awful part. Each one was a thing that could technically happen. And I understood that Halbrook was going to build a floor out of those technically could happens and stand on it, because the alternative was to radio the surface and call them liars. And a company man does not have that in him. It is not in the spec. Raise it with the surface, I said. Ask them to confirm the crew is in Dome 2. Ask them to put a Dome 2 man on the relay to say he can see them. He said he would. He raised it that afternoon. The relay crawled out and crawled back, and the voice said, Dome 2 comms are down for maintenance, which was a new thing, because Dome 2 comms had been up an hour before, and I checked, and Nadia checked, and by evening Dome 2 was showing the same soft degraded telemetry that Dome 1 had shown in the hours before it went off the board entirely. Not dead, just going quiet, one reading at a time, like a man lowering his voice as he backs out of a room. That was the 5th night, and that was the night I first heard the sound, though I did not yet know it for what it was, and I have spent a long time since deciding whether I would have done anything different if I had. I was in the spine, in the access trunk, between Dome 3 and the environmental core, running a scrubber line by hand, because I did not trust the automated readout anymore. The access trunk was a vertical steel throat, maybe 40 feet long, ladder on one wall, the big ventilation ducting running the other, and it was always loud with air movement and always cold. I was halfway up with a light clamped to a rung when the sound came down the ducting from below me, from the direction of the lower domes, from the dark. It was wet. That is the first and truest word for it. A long, heavy, wet dragging, and then a pause, and then the drag again, coming up the ductwork the way sound travels in pipe, close and hollow and impossible to place. My first thought was a burst line, water getting somewhere it should not be, and I actually felt relief, because a burst line was a problem I knew how to have. I hung there and listened for it to resolve into a leak, a spray, a steady run, the honest sounds water makes. It did not resolve. It kept its rhythm. Drag, and pause, and drag, and the pause between was not the pause of water finding a level. It was the pause of a thing choosing to stop and then choosing to go on. And once, in one of the pauses, from far down the duct, there came a soft rolling knock, low and slow, a single deep pulse that I felt in the ladder rung under my hand more than I heard, and every part of me that was older than my thinking mind went cold and still and told me to put out my light. I put out my light. I do not fully know why. I hung in the black of the access trunk with the dead flashlight in my fist, and I did not move, and I did not breathe hard. And I listened to the wet drag come up a little farther and then stop, and stay stopped, for a long time, long enough that my arms began to shake on the ladder, and then, slow, it went back down. The sound got smaller. It went back toward Dome 2 and the dark below it, and after a while there was only the air moving in the cold, and I climbed up out of the trunk into the light of Dome 3 with my legs not entirely mine, and I told myself it was a line. I told myself that all the way back to my bunk. A line, a leak, a pump. I was very good, that whole first week, at telling myself things. It is a skill I learned sending money home instead of going home. I got to where I could tell myself almost anything. Dome 2 went the way Dome 1 had gone, only slower, so that we got to watch it, which was worse. Over the next 2 days, its telemetry thinned out reading by reading. First, the environmental sensors dropped to intermittent, then the pressure monitoring went ragged. Nadia would raise the Dome 2 watch officer on the relay and get static, or get nothing. Or once got a man named Petrov who answered on the third try and said everything was fine down there in a voice that had too much air in it, a man reading a line somebody had told him to read. And then the channel to Dome 2 never opened again after that. The last honest thing that came up out of Dome 2 was not a voice. It was a pressure spike on the settling tanks at 3 in the morning, a hard jump, and then a fall to nothing, the signature of a large volume of water arriving somewhere water was not supposed to be, and then the sensor that reported it went off the board with all the rest. The people still alive on the station, which by then meant the 19 of us in Dome 3 and Dome 4, stopped pretending after that. There is a moment in any bad thing where the group agreement to be calm breaks, and it broke that morning in the Dome 3 mess. Men who had been telling each other it was geology and telemetry glitches, and the company getting its paperwork sorted, stood up from the tables and started talking about the pods. A hydraulic tech I knew only a little, a woman named Ruiz, said out loud the thing nobody had said. which was that both lower domes were dead and the surface was lying about it, and we were being cleared out one level at a time, like the station was a house and something was going room to room, turning off the lights. Cleared out. She said it, and I thought about the load cell reading 0, and I thought about the wet drag in the ducting, and I did not argue with her. Nobody argued with her. That was the moment, I think, that we all stopped being a crew and started being a steel can full of frightened animals at the bottom of the sea, each one doing the private arithmetic of the pods. Halbrook fought it. He got up in front of the mess and told everyone that leaving the station without an order was a contract breach and an insurance void, and that anyone who touched a pod without authorization was throwing away their pay and their standing, and maybe their liberty when they surfaced. He was not being cruel. He believed it. He believed that the rules were a kind of roof, and that if we all just stayed under the roof, the storm would pass. And I saw men and women who were no longer children look at him with something close to pity, because most of them had already understood the thing Halbrook could not let himself understand, which was that the roof was gone and had been gone since Dome 1 went off the board, and that the rules he was quoting were written by the same people who were, at that moment, deciding whether we were worth the cost of a rescue. We raised the surface one more time, all of us in the comms suite, Halbrook and Nadia and me and a dozen others crowded into that small space. Nadia put it to them straight. 2 domes are dark. We have lost contact with more than 20 personnel. We are requesting emergency evacuation of the remaining crew. And the relay crawled out into the dark and crawled back, and the voice that answered was not the scheduling officer this time. It was a different voice, smoother, a voice from higher up the building, and it did not answer the question we had asked. It answered a different question, one about liability, in a language built to survive being read aloud in a courtroom. Aegis Deep Sea Resources is aware of anomalies at Trench Station 9 and is coordinating an appropriate response, the voice said. Personnel are reminded that unauthorized use of emergency egress equipment constitutes a material breach of contract and forfeits all compensation and hazard entitlements. Personnel are advised to remain at station and await instruction. Nadia asked how long. The relay crawled. Await instruction, the voice said again, as if the words themselves were the instruction, and I understood then, fully and finally, in a way that went all the way down to the floor of me, that no one was coming. Not because they could not. Because the math had already been run somewhere in a bright, quiet office, and the answer the math gave was that a rescue at 11,000 feet cost more than we were worth, and that the cheapest outcome available to Aegis Deep Sea Resources was for the trench to finish doing quietly what the trench had started, and for the company to be very sorry about it afterward, in a statement written by lawyers. Teller was gone, and this was the night I let myself know it. I had been holding it off. All through Dome 1 I had kept him in the transferred column of my mind. The lie the company told. Even after the load cell told me the lie was a lie. It is possible to know a thing with the part of me that read numbers, and to not know it at all with the part that played gin with a man 3 nights a week. But when Dome 2 died with that pressure spike, the numbers won. Teller had been in Dome 1. Teller had gone off the board at 2 in the morning on the 4th night with the roar, and the roar was the drill, and the drill was Teller's crew, and the drill had not run since. He had 11 days left. 3 more postings, and the boat. He had taped a photograph of an aluminum bass boat inside a locker that was now, I understood, sitting dark and flooded and full of the cold at the bottom of a dead dome with the sea floor a few feet under it, through a viewport. Nobody would ever learn not to look through again. I did not cry. I have wondered about that. I think there was no room for it yet. I sat in the comm suite after the others had drifted out, and I thought about the last hand of gin we played, and how he had let me catch him palming a card, and how I had thought I understood the whole of his cheating in that moment, and I understood now that I had not understood the whole of anything about him or about any of it. I had been a man mailing love home, and telling himself it counted. Teller had been a man 3 boats from the sun. The company had a number for each of us, and the numbers were close, and neither one was large enough to send a ship. That was the night Boone found me. Boone was a maintenance hand, 61 years old, and he had worked the deep and the high, both oil platforms and mines, and once a full year on an ice station near the pole. The kind of man who had spent his whole life in places built to keep out something that wanted in. He had a smoker's cough he had carried for 30 years and a tremor in his hands that got worse in the cold, and he was not supposed to pass the medical for a deep posting anymore. And he had passed it anyway because the company doctor was a screen 1,000 miles away who checked a box. He found me in the comm suite with the thermos of the terrible mess coffee, and he did not say anything soft to me. He sat down across from me the way Teller used to sit down to cards, and he said, "You pulled the lift logs." Nadia told me. He said, "So you already know they are feeding us a line." He said, "Good." A man who knows he is being lied to has a chance. A man who believes the line lies down under the roof and waits. I asked him what he thought was happening. I expected him to say sabotage or a hull breach or a fire. He drank his coffee and he looked at the dark water in the monitor over my shoulder for a while, the slow updrift of the detritus and the dock lights, and he said something I did not expect from a man with grease under his nails. "I think the old boys were right about this water," he said, and then he told me to go find Nadia because Nadia had been up all night in the archives, and Nadia had found something. What Nadia found was buried in the station's own survey data, the geological and historical assessment the company had paid a survey firm to compile before they ever sank the first dome. A fat file nobody on the station had reason to open because it was all pre-construction and none of it kept us alive. Somewhere in the back of it, digitized and appended and forgotten, were the scanned pages of much older records, salvage and whaling logs from the far end of the last century and the start of the one before it. The accounts of the men who had worked these waters, when working them meant a wooden ship and a diving bell and a length of air hose, gathered up by some thorough survey writer as historical background and never read again. There was a hard hat diver's account from 1909. He had been down off a salvage barge near this exact reach of the trench, in a bell, working a wreck, when the seasonal currents turned, which the old logs marked by the way the deep water came up warmer and wrong for a stretch of weeks each year. He wrote about a light. He called it a cold light, no heat in it, a pale blue that came up out of the deep and moved against the current, which nothing dead does, and he wrote that it had no shape the mind could hold, that it was always sliding into a new one, and that it was blind. He was certain it was blind. He wrote that it passed within a fathom of the bell and never knew he was there until he moved, until he reached for the signal line to be hauled up, and that the moment his arm moved, the light turned toward him all at once, the whole vast slow mass of it, and came for the bell, and he was hauled up out of the water so fast his ears bled, and 2 men on the barge died of it later, the Bens, and he counted himself the luckiest man alive to have lost only his hearing and his nerve. He wrote one more thing, the thing Nadia read to me twice because I asked her to. He wrote that the old crews had a rule about the cold light, passed down from men older than him, and the rule was that when the light was in the water, a man held still. He did not swim. He did not fight. He did not run, because it hurt, running the way a spider hears a fly, through the water, through the line, through the twitch of the meat. He held still, and he let it pass, and if he was lucky and the current turned back, it went down again into the deep and slept. 1909, and there were others. A sealing cruise log from 1890-something that spoke of the same season and the same light, and men lost off the ice with no marks on the ones that washed back. A note in a Russian hand that the survey writer had translated in a footnote, a single line, that the trench had an old name in the tongue of the people who had fished this coast for longer than any ship had sailed it, and the name meant the cold that eats. That was all. The survey writer had folded it in the way a report folds in a bit of local color, a quaint superstition to round the thing out, and the company built a station over the top of it and pulled the pages into a file and never read them, because superstition does not have a line on a balance sheet. What took it out of the world of old sailors and into my own instruments was the water itself, the seasonal current shift the old logs described, the deep water coming up warm and wrong. I could see it. It was in my telemetry, in the vent temperature and the current sensors on the anchor mounts, and it had begun the week the shuttle left, and it was deepening by the day. The water in the trench was turning over. The season the old crews feared was on us, and it had woken the thing they feared with it, and the thing had started at the bottom, at Dome 1, closest to the deep, and it was working its way up the spine toward the light and the warmth and the twitch of the last living meat on the station, which was us. I did not believe it because I wanted to. I believed it because it was the only model that fit the data, and I had spent my whole career trusting the model that fit the data over the story that felt good. And now the model that fit the data was a blind, cold light coming up out of the deep to eat us, and I would have given anything to be wrong. Boone believed it because he had watched it work. That was the peace he brought, and it is the peace that kept two of us alive. In the hours after Dome 2 died, before the pods, Boone had gone down into the top of the shaft as far as he dared, down toward the Dome 2 seal, to look with his own eyes. And he had seen the pale blue glow come up against the far side of a viewport, filling the water there, and he had seen how it moved. It did not search the way a man searches. Sweeping, quartering the ground, it drifted, aimless, until something moved, and Boone had watched a loose cable end, swaying in the current on his side of the glass, draw the whole mass of it over in an instant. Watched it press against the viewport, feeling for the thing that had moved, and then lose interest and drift off when the cable went still. Blind, Boone said, blind as a cavefish and twice as old. It hunts the twitch. It hunts the little lightning in a live muscle, the way a hammerhead does, only slower and hungrier, and there is no bottom to it. He had come back up, and he had started, in his methodical old way, working out how to stay alive in a room with a thing like that. And the answer he came to was the same answer the diver had written down in 1909. Hold still, Boone told me. Be furniture. Give it nothing that moves, and it slides right on past. That is the whole trick, and it is the hardest thing a body ever does. We did not get to plan around it, because the pods went that night. I do not blame the ones who ran. I have tried to hold blame for them, and it will not stick, because they were right, in the small hard way of people saving their own lives. There were 2 emergency pods in the Dome 4 dock, and between them they held 16, and there were 19 of us left alive. And the pods would only launch for a clearance key, and the keys lived with rank. Dome, supervisors, senior staff, the medic, Halbrook. When the word went through Dome 3 that the deep water was warming and the thing was climbing and the surface had said await instruction one time too many, the ones with keys did not call a meeting. They went up the shaft to the dock quiet and fast, the way people move when they have already decided and do not want to be talked out of it, and by the time the rest of us understood what was happening, the first pod was already sealed. I got to the dock as the second one was filling. There is a version of this where I am a hero, and it is not the true one. I did not try to force my way aboard. I stood at the rail of the mustering bay and I watched the last seats fill, 16 people crammed into 2 pods built for 16, and I looked for a face that would look back and make room, and the face I found was Halbrook's. He was in the second pod. The company man. They had authorized his key from the surface, I learned later, in the same hours they told the rest of us to await instruction. The building had reached down 11,000 feet to save the one of us whose value it could see on a sheet, its own man, its bolt torqued to spec, and it had left the engineer and the comms officer and the old maintenance hand to the cold that eats, and Halbrook knew it. That was the thing I saw in his face at the end. He knew exactly what he was and what was being done and which side of the glass he was on, and he could not stop it and would not refuse it. And he looked at me through the closing hatch with an expression I have never found the word for, something past shame, the look of a man watching himself be proven to be only what he was afraid he was. He said my name. He started to say something else. Then the hatch sealed on it, and the pod dropped away from the ring, and its light strobed, and it was gone up into the black, a coin down a well going the wrong way, up toward a surface I would not see. and the dock light swung empty, and there were 3 of us left standing in the mustering bay of Dome 4. Me, Nadia, Boone. 3 people without keys, 11,000 feet down, with the deep water warming and the blue light climbing the spine, and no ship coming, and the whole weight of the sea leaning patiently on every weld between us and the thing that was coming up to feed. The first thing Boone did, once the pods were gone and the shock of it had drained down into something colder and more useful, was to make us sit on the floor of the mustering bay and be quiet and think, instead of running, because running was the one thing the water listened for. We had, by my count, 3 problems, and they were stacked on top of each other like the domes themselves. The first was the thing coming up the spine. The second was air and power, because a station this deep does not coast. It is kept alive every second by machinery, and the machinery was ours to run or not run. The third was that every piece of machinery we ran to stay alive made the exact kind of signal the thing hunted. Boone had watched it take a swaying cable for a living animal. Nadia had read the diver's account. I had the one thing neither of them had, which was that I knew, down to the breaker, what on this station drew current, and what that current looked like from the water. And I understood before either of them said it out loud that the 2 ways of dying, the cold that eats and the cold that simply stops a heart when the air runs out, were wired to the same panel. Run the systems, and the thing finds us. Kill the systems, and the trench does not have to bother, because the dark and the cold will do it for free. We did what we could in the hours we had. We went through Dome 4, and we killed everything that did not keep us breathing. Every screen, every idle motor, every strip of light, every device with a battery in it that might tick or wake or pulse. I pulled Nadia's handset, and my own, and Boone's, and I killed them at the board because a phone looking for a signal is a small, steady heartbeat of its own, and I did not want 3 extra hearts beating in that dome. I took the environmental core down to the barest trickle a human body can live on, the scrubbers cycling slow to keep the air from turning to poison, the reserve battery bank feeding only that, and I calculated how long the reserve would hold at that draw, and I did not tell the others the number, because the number was not a good one, and there was nothing to be done about it. We had the reserve, and we had the air the scrubbers could keep clean on the reserve, and between them we had days, not many. Enough if the current turned when the old logs said it would, and not enough if it did not, and no way on earth to know which. Then the company finished with us. It came the way the worst news always comes down there, over the relay, and a voice built to survive a courtroom, except this time the voice was not talking to us. Nadia caught it because she had left one channel up, a low-power monitor on the main corporate band, and near the end of that first day alone we heard the traffic that was never meant for our ears. Aegis Deep Sea Resources had filed for protection. The company was bankrupt. It had been bankrupt, in the way these things are, for longer than it admitted. And Trench Station 9 was not a rescue problem anymore. It was an asset in a proceeding, a liability to be zeroed out. And the men handling it now were not safety officers or schedulers. They were something worse. They were the people who close a thing down. We heard them give the order. Not to us. About us. A station 11,000 feet down with a live geothermal reactor at the bottom of it is a hazard in a bankruptcy, because a reactor left running with no crew and no maintenance is a meltdown waiting to happen. And a meltdown is a headline, and the headline is a cost. So they reach down the relay and they scram the reactor from the surface, shut it down cold to make the station safe. Safe being a word that meant safe for them, safe on paper, safe from the liability of a crew they had already written off. And with the reactor died the last of the main power, and the main pumps, and the heat, and the great hum that had been the sound of my own blood for 179 days went out of the world all at once. And Trench Station 9 dropped into a dark and a cold, and a silence it had never known since the day it was sunk. And then, to be thorough, to make the asset tidy, they sealed it. The heavy pressure doors that closed off the spine from the dock, from the world, from any pod or ship or diver that might ever come, They drove them shut from the surface and locked them. Because an open station is an open liability and a sealed one is a line on a form that says contained, they did it believing the station was empty. I have gone back and forth on whether that is better or worse, that they did not know we were in there. I have decided it does not matter even a little. Knowing or not knowing, the math was the same, and the math was what killed us. We were an expense that had already been subtracted. Whether the men at the surface pictured 3 faces in the dark when they threw the seal, or pictured nothing at all, the seal came down the same, and it came down on us. When the lights died, I was standing in the environmental core with my hand on the reserve panel, and I felt the whole station change under me. Not just dark, heavier. The pumps had been holding 1,000 small pressures in balance, and with them gone I could feel the sea settle its full weight onto the domes, a deep groan running up the column as the steel took the load raw, a sound like a ship's hull working in a swell, but slower and lower and without any end to it. The sound of 11,000 feet of ocean leaning in to see if we would hold. We held. The domes were built cheap, but they were built to hold pressure. That was the one thing the company had not skimped, because a dome that failed was a dome full of dead assets and a lawsuit, and so the steel groaned and held, and the 3 of us were sealed alive inside it in the black. Nadia found me in the dark with a chemical light, one of the dim green sticks from an emergency kit. The kind cracked and shaken to life, no battery, no current, nothing for the water to hear. She had a handful of them. Boone had found them too, and a case of them in a locker, and it turned out to be the smartest thing any of us did, because for the whole of what came after, we lived by that cold green chemical glow, and never once by a light that drew power, and I have wondered since whether that is the only reason 2 of us are still breathing. A flashlight is a beacon. A glow stick is just a color in the dark. We gathered in the mustering bay, the 3 of us, because it was the highest point in the station and the farthest from the deep, and we made a kind of camp there against the curved hull. And Boone laid out the rule one more time so that it would be in all our bodies and not just our heads. When it comes, he said, and it is coming, we hold still, whatever it does, however close it gets. It is blind and it is deaf to everything but the water and the twitch of us. And if we give it nothing, we are furniture, we are pipe, we are a part of the wall. It cannot want what it cannot find. He looked at me and he looked at Nadia, and he said the last part slow, because he knew it was the part that would break us. It will get close, he said. It will get close enough to touch. And when it does, the thing your whole body will scream to do is move, and moving is dying. You let it touch you. You let it touch you, and you do not move, and you wait, and it passes. Nadia asked how long we would have to hold. Boone said as long as it takes. I did the only useful thing I had left, which was to tell them what I knew about the current. That the old logs said the season ran a few weeks, and then the deep water turned back and the thing went down to sleep. And that my last good telemetry, before the reactor died, had the shift already well along, maybe past its middle. Days, I told them, not weeks. If the logs are right, and my numbers are right, days. And Boone nodded slow, and did not say the thing all 3 of us knew, which was that days of holding still in the dark with that thing in the room was not a thing a human body was built to survive, and that we were going to try anyway, because trying was the only move left on the board. We put out all but one of the green lights. We sat down against the cold hull, and we waited for the blue to come up the spine. It came on the 2nd day, though day had stopped meaning anything, and it announced itself the way the old diver said it would, in the floor before it came in the door. I felt it before I heard it, a slow deep knock in the grating under me, one pulse, and then a long wait, and then another, and it was so like a heartbeat that my own heart tried to fall into step with it, and I had to fight to keep them separate. Boone's hand found my knee in the green dark and pressed once hard. Nadia went still beside me the way a rabbit goes still, all at once and completely. The knock came again, closer, and with it, far down the spine, the first thin edge of the light. It did not come like a flood. It came like a stain spreading. The seal at the bottom of the mustering bay, the heavy door of the surface had locked. began to show a line of blue along its lower seam. Faint at first, the color of a gas flame turned all the way down, and the line brightened as the knock came up through the floor, brightened and swelled, and I understood that the thing was not going to open the door because the thing did not need to. Water finds every way in that water can find. There were drains and conduits in the great central shaft. There were 100 paths for the sea through a station built to keep out pressure, and never built to keep out a thing that could pour itself thin as oil and come up a pipe. The light was in the walls now. It came up through the floor drains as a soft blue welling. It came up the dead ventilation ducts, and I heard the wet drag start inside them, that long soak sliding I had heard in the access trunk on the 5th night, close now, all around us, in the bones of the dome. And then the first of it came into the room, and I made myself watch, because Boone had told me not to shut my eyes, because a body that cannot see the thing cannot hold still against it, because it panics worst in the pure dark, and he was right. What came into the mustering bay through the low drains and the vent grills was not a shape. That was the worst of it, and the truest thing I can tell about it. It had no edge my eye could hold. It came as a slow blue pouring, a mass of something between water and flesh and rot, pale lit from inside itself, threaded through with brighter veins of light that pulsed in time with the knock in the floor. And where the green of our chemical light fell on it, there was a wet gleam of surfaces that were never the same. Surfaced twice, folds and strands, and a drifting cloud of finer matter around it like silt around a landed net. It smelled of the deep, of cold iron and salt and the sweet rotten reek of things that die where the sun has never been. It filled the low end of the bay, and it rose, slow, feeling upward, and the veins of light inside it swung and searched, and I understood that the searching was not sight. It was the other thing. It was feeling the water for us. It was listening with its whole vast body for the little lightning of a live nerve, and the three of us sat against the hull 20 feet from it and became wood. Every muscle in me wanted to run, and I did not run. My lungs wanted to drag in great heaving breaths, and I made them take small, slow ones through my open mouth. No sound, no hard pull of the chest. My eyes wanted to blink and clench, and I let them water and burn, and I kept them soft. A cramp started in my right calf within the first hour, a slow twisting knot, and I let it build and did not shift my weight against it, because shifting my weight was moving. I stayed beside the pain and did not fight it, until the calf was a bar of white fire, and still I did not move, and the light drifted 3 feet from my boots, feeling, and did not find me, and moved on. It went through the bay slow, quartering nothing, drifting where the faint currents of the dead station took it, and everywhere it drifted it found the killed screens and pressed its light against them and moved on, because dead glass has no heartbeat. It found a ventilation fan I had stopped and folded around the blades and hung there a long moment, and I felt Nadia's terror come off her like cold off a window, because the fan was 6 feet from her face, and the light hung there feeling the still blades for the twitch of life, and finding none, and it slid away. It was patient in a way that unmade something in me to watch. It had no hurry, because it had no rival and no clock, and no fear. It had come up out of the deep on the turning of the water, the way it had come up for the diver in 1909 and for the sealers before him, and for whatever fed these waters before there were men in them at all. And it would go back down when the water turned, and in between it would feel the dark patiently for anything foolish enough to be alive and unable to be still. The knock on the floor was its slow pulse, and I learned in those hours to read the pulse. When the light was near, the pulse was strong and close, and the veins in the mass ran fast and bright. When it drifted to the far end of the bay, the pulse eased and the veins dimmed, and in those eased stretches, and only in those, we could let out a held breath, ease a cramp a half inch, let the tears fall that had been standing in the eyes. We learned it without speaking, the three of us, learned to move in the troughs of that terrible tide and freeze on its crests, and for a while, for the first long night of it, the learning kept us alive. The light swelled through the bay and receded toward the spine, swelled and receded, and each time it receded a little farther and stayed gone a little longer, and I began, God help me, to hope, which is the most expensive thing a person can do in a place like that. Hope made me careless, and that dark did not forgive careless, not once, and it did not forgive it in Boone. Time came apart in there. I had killed every clock along with everything else that drew current, and the only measures left to me were the slow tide of the light and the state of my own body, and neither one kept honest time. I think it was 3 days. Might have been 4. Boone would say later, and the little he ever said about it after, that it was 3 nights and the part of a 4th, and I have decided to trust his count over my own, because my own count was made by a mind that had come loose from its moorings, and his was made by a man who had spent 40 years teaching himself to stay bolted down. The light did not stay. That was the mercy and the torture of it both. It would come up the spine, fill the bay, feel through us, and recede. Gone for a stretch, down the spine toward the deep, and in the gone stretches we lived. We had staged what we could in the first hours, water and a case of ration bars and the chemical lights, all of it within an arm's reach, so that we never had to cross the room. And in the troughs, when the light was gone, we drank in small, slow swallows, and ate a few bites, and eased the cramps that had set like rebar in our legs and backs. We took turns, one watching the seam at the bottom of the bay for the first blue, while the other 2 let go for a few minutes, and then we would feel the knock start again in the floor, and we would drink the last swallow, and set the bottle down slow, and become wood. We had to move once, and the moving was the worst hour of my life that did not have Boone's death in it. We had made our camp against the hull, at the high end of the bay, near a bank of floor drains, because in the first dark those drains were dead and dry, and it seemed as good a place as any. But the light used the drains. It came up through them, and by the second night the strongest welling of it, the place where the blue first showed and last faded each time, was the drain bank not 10 feet from where we sat. Each cycle it came up closer under us, and Boone understood before I did what that meant, which was that we had set our camp on the thing's front door, that we were sitting at the mouth of the pipe it poured itself up through, and that sooner or later a cycle would come when it welled up directly beneath us and found 3 warm, still bodies sitting on top of its own doorway. And holding still saves nobody when the thing rises up inside the space they are being still in. We had to cross the bay. We had to get to the far hull, the low end, away from the drains, and there was one way to do it, and it was to do it in a trough, in a gone stretch, in the black minutes when the light had receded down the spine, and to be across and still again before it came back. The bay was maybe 60 feet across, 60 feet of open grating in the dark, with a chemical light we did not dare carry lit, and a returning tide with no schedule a man could trust. Boone went first because he said an old man was the most expendable, and I hated him for the arithmetic of it and could not argue it. When the light faded down the spine and the knock in the floor eased and stopped, he went low, slow, on his hands and knees across the grating, and Nadia and I knelt at the old camp and listened to him go, the small, careful scrape of him, and counted in our heads the way I counted between lightning and thunder as a kid, trying to guess how much trough we had left. He made the far side. I heard him stop. Then he did the thing we had agreed on, the only signal we allowed ourselves. He tapped the hull once, soft, a single knock that meant he was still and safe, and it was Nadia's turn. She froze. Not the good freeze, the survival freeze. The other one, the one where the body locks up because it has been asked for more than it has. She knelt beside me with her breath going short and fast and shallow, and I could feel her shaking, and the trough was running out. I could feel it running out the way a held breath runs out. And I put my mouth to her ear, and I said the only thing I had, which was not brave and was not wise. I said, Lena is at a swim meet, and I am going to be there, and I need you to move so I can be there. Go. Nadia, go now. And something in that reached her where nothing calmer would have, and she went. She went low and fast across the grating, and I knelt alone at the old camp with the drain bank beside me and waited my turn and listened to her go, and prayed to nothing in particular that the light would hold off its return for 20 more. seconds, 10 more, and then I heard the soft double tap from the far hole. That meant she was across and still, and it was me. I did not make it clean. I was halfway across the open bay, low on the cold grating, when the knock came back into the floor under my hands. One deep pulse, close, and then the first thin blue began to well up behind me at the drain bank I had just left, and I was 10 feet from the far hull in the open, with nothing to be but a live moving thing on an empty floor, the one thing in all the world that the light could not miss. I did the hardest thing I have ever made my body do. I stopped. In the open, in the middle of the floor, with the blue coming up behind me and Boone and Nadia 10 feet ahead of me pressed to the far hull, I stopped moving, mid-crawl. One hand lifted off the grating and my weight on the other 3 points, and I held it like a photograph of a man crawling, while the light welled up out of the drains behind me and filled the high end of the bay and began, slow, to drift out across the open floor, toward the far hull, toward Boone and Nadia, toward me, frozen in the middle of its path. It came over me. The light drifted over me where I crouched frozen in the open, the cold of it pouring down over my back and my lifted hand, the pale blue of it lighting the grating under me and my own knuckles white on the steel. And it did not find me, because I had become, in the open, in the impossible middle of the floor, a thing that did not move, a shape, a part of the station. It felt the water all around me for the twitch of a living nerve, and I gave it none, not in my lifted hand, not in my burning thighs, not in my chest, which took its small, slow, silent sips of air the whole time the grave cold of the thing was flowing over me. And after a time that had no length to it, the light drifted on past, toward the far hull, felt along it, found Boone and Nadia gone to wood against it, felt them, moved on, and receded down the spine, and the knock eased, and the dark came back, and I crawled the last 10 feet on legs that were no longer sending back any word of themselves, and reached the far hull, and Nadia's hands pulled me in against it, and the 3 of us were together again on the safe side. And I understood then, past any doubt, that the rule was true, that it was the whole and only truth of that place. I gave it nothing, and it could not have me, not in the open, not at the mouth of the pipe, not with its cold pouring down the back of my neck. A body held still is furniture, and furniture is safe, and that was the whole of the law down there. It was not comfort. There is no comfort in it. But it was true, and true was the only thing down there that ever once held. The worst of it was not the light. The worst of it was the stillness itself, the holding hour on hour, because a body is not built to do nothing that hard. Stillness is not rest. Stillness under threat is the most work a man can do. Every muscle held at a low burn to keep from firing, the mind riding herd on 100 small animals that all want to bolt, and there is nothing to spend the fear on. No running, no fighting, no task for the hands, only the holding. And when there is nothing for the hands and nothing for the legs, and the fear has nowhere to go, it goes inward, and it opens doors in me that I had kept shut for good reason. Mine went to Lena. I had nothing to do in the dark but breathe slow and hold still and be alone inside my own skull. And my skull, given that much time and that much fear, went straight to my daughter, the way water goes to the lowest place. I thought about the voicemail. I had it memorized without ever meaning to memorize it, the fast, proud rush of her voice telling me she made the swim team, the little breath she took in the middle, the pause at the end where she waited for me to answer and I was not there to. In the dark of that dome I answered it. I answered it 1,000 times. I said all the things I had meant to say from the station once I was settled, once I had more than an apology to offer, and I understood, holding still with the cold blue light drifting 3 feet from my face, that there was never going to be more than an apology, that the better version I kept waiting to have was a lie I told myself so I could keep not calling, and that a girl does not need her father to have the right words. She needs him to pick up. She needs him to be there on the other end of the line when she takes that little breath. And I had been 11,000 feet down under all the water in the world, unreachable, mailing money, calling it love, and the awful joke of it, the joke that the trench played on me, and that I have not stopped turning over since, is that I had made myself into exactly the thing the company made of me. A line item, a remittance, a number that arrived on schedule and was never once a voice. I had done it to her before they ever did it to me, and now I was going to die in the dark, and she would get a letter, if she got anything, a letter from a bankrupt company's lawyers. And the last thing I would ever have been to my daughter was a check that stopped coming. I did not cry. I could not, because crying moves the chest and the face, and the light was close. So I held still, and I grieved without a single tear or sound, which is a thing I did not know a body could do until I did it. Grief pressed down, flat and silent, under the need to not be found, and I have never fully gotten up off the floor of that grief since. Some part of me is still sitting against that hull in the dark, answering a voicemail, holding still. There was a night, if it was night, when Nadia came apart, and Boone put her back together with nothing but his voice, and I have thought since that it was the last real work of his life and the best of it. It happened in a trough, in a gone stretch, which was the only time any of us could break, because breaking made noise, and noise was death. And so we had all learned to save our breaking for the dark minutes when the light was down the spine. Nadia had held better than either of us through the first days, the radio steady calm of her, the woman who did not come apart on the channel while other people did. But steadiness is a bank account, and hers ran dry the way anyone's does. In one gone stretch, she started to shake in a way that was not the cold, and her breath came faster and faster, climbing, the way breath climbs right before it turns into sound, into a sob or a scream, the kind of sound that would bring the blue up the spine before she could take it back. I heard it climbing, and I did not know what to do with it. I reached for her hand, and it did no good. She was going up and away, up out of the reach of the rule, up toward the one thing that would kill us, and I could not follow her up there and bring her down. Boone could. Boone came across in the dark, slow, his old bones on the grating, and he got himself close to her, and he started talking, very low, under the breath, a murmur pitched below anything the water could carry, and he did not tell her to calm down, which never in the history of the world calmed anyone. He asked her about her mother. He asked her what her mother's kitchen looked like. And Nadia, gulping, shaking, answered him, because a question is a rope and an answer is a hand closing on it. And she told him about a yellow kitchen with a window over the sink and a radio her mother kept on a station that played old songs. And Boone kept asking what songs, what did the counters look like, was there a smell? And with each answer her breath came down a notch, and a notch walked down out of the high country by an old man asking her about a yellow kitchen at the bottom of the sea. He walked her all the way down. By the time the knock started again in the floor, she was breathing slow and her hands were still, and she pressed one of them flat against the hull and became wood. And the light came up and felt through the three of us and found nothing that moved and went away, and Nadia lived because a 61-year-old maintenance hand knew that a rising panic is not fought head-on, but handed a yellow kitchen to walk down into. I asked him about it later, in the next trough, how he knew to do that. He was quiet a while. Then he said he had talked a lot of scared men down off a lot of high places over 40 years in bad rooms, and that the trick was always the same. You do not argue with the fear. You just give the person something true and small and theirs to hold, and you keep handing them the next small true thing until their feet are back under them. He said, everybody has a yellow kitchen. You just have to ask till you find it. And I have carried that along with everything else I carried up out of there, and I have used it on other scared people in other bad rooms in the dry years since. And every time I do, I am back in that dark for a second, handing Nadia the next small true thing, borrowing the last good thing an old man taught me before the water took him. Boone was failing, and he knew it before we did. The cold was the enemy of the old man in him. With the reactor dead, there was no heat, and the deep cold of the sea came in through the steel a little more every hour, and the tremor in Boone's hands that had been a small thing in the warm station became, in that cold, a shaking he had to fight with his whole will. And the cough, he had a smoker's cough 30 years deep, and a cough is the loudest thing a still body can do. An explosion of movement and air and firing muscle, a beacon lit in an instant, and Boone spent those days swallowing it. I watched him do it. When the light was near and the need to cough came on him, I saw him take it down into himself and hold it, his face going purple with it, his eyes streaming, the cords standing out in his old neck, taking a thing that his lungs were screaming to expel and pressing it back down by main force because letting it out meant dying, and not just his own dying, because a cough would bring the light onto all three of us. He held them down one after another, for 3 days and the part of a fourth, and it took everything he had. And he was 61 years old and freezing and starving, and he did not have everything he had for very long. On what Boone counted as the third night, in a trough when the light was gone down the spine, he spoke to me for the first time in a day, low, his voice wrecked from the coughs he had swallowed. "You and Nadia are getting out of here," he said. "The water is turning. You said days, and it has been days. It is going down soon and staying down. And when it does, you two are going to find a way through that seal or wait for the scrappers, because the company will send scrappers. Dead men do not stop a bankruptcy court. Somebody will come to cut this station up for salvage, and you are going to be alive when they do." He gripped my wrist in the dark, his hand shaking, cold as the hull. "You are going to call your girl," he said. I do not know how he knew. I had not said her name out loud. Maybe I had said it in the dark without knowing. "You are going to call your girl," he said, "and you are not going to wait until you have something good to say, because there is no such thing, there is only picking up. And I have thought a great deal since about how an old maintenance hand freezing to death at the bottom of the sea knew the exact shape of the thing I had been hiding from for 179 days. And I think the answer is that he had a shape just like it somewhere in his own life. Some phone he had not picked up, some check he had mailed instead of a self, and that men who work the deep for 40 years are all, every one of them, running from the same handful of rooms. The knock started in the floor. The blue came up the seam. Boone let go of my wrist and put his hands flat against the hull and set his chin on his chest and became, one more time, a part of the wall. And I did not know it was the last time he would manage it. I said nothing back to him, nothing to answer what he had just given me, because I believed we had more troughs coming, more gone stretches, more small windows left to be human in. I believed the count was still running in our favor. It did not cost me anything, believing that. It cost Boone everything. The light was in the bay and closer than it had been, drifting along our side of the room a few feet out, when the cough took Boone. I did not see it start because I was holding my eyes soft and forward the way I had trained myself, but I heard it, the small wet catch in his chest, the hitch, and every part of me went to ice, because I knew that sound. I had watched him swallow 100 of them, but he was cold past the end of what his will could reach. 3 nights, and the part of a fourth of cold pouring in through the steel, and his body had spent all its holding, and the cough came up out of him, and there was nothing left in him to press it down. He fought it even then. I heard him fight it, heard the strangled clamp of him trying to take it back down his throat, and for 1 second I thought he had it, thought he had swallowed it like all the others. Then it broke. It came out of him not as a full cough, but worse, a hard tearing spasm, his whole chest firing, his boots scraping the grating as his body jerked against his own will. A bright, hard burst of motion and sound and living muscle in a room where motion was the one unforgivable thing. The light turned toward him all at once. The whole vast, slow, patient mass of it, that had drifted for 3 days like something half asleep, came around and toward Boone in less than the time it takes to say his name, the way The whole surface of a pond turns at once when the wind hits it, the way current grabs a dropped line. The blue of it flared bright as a welding arc, and the knock in the floor became a single deep slam I felt in my teeth, and it was on him. It was on him, and I was 3 feet away, and I did not move. God forgive me. I did not move. Nadia did not move. Boone had spent his last held breath teaching us that the only thing worse than what was about to happen to him was for it to happen to all 3 of us. And we sat against that hull with our friend, a body's length away, and we became wood while the light folded over him. The cold of it washed over us as it passed, a deep, wet, grave cold that raised every hair on me and that I have felt in my sleep every night since. I heard the wet drag become something else, a sound I have never been able to unhear, and I heard Boone make one sound, not a scream. He did not give it a scream. One short sound that might have been a word, and might have been my name or Nadia's or nothing at all, and then the drag, and then a stillness worse than any of the stillness before it, because it was the stillness of a thing that had found what it came up for and was busy with it. The light dimmed down from its arc-bright flare to a deep sated glow, low and slow and pulsing 3 feet from where I sat not moving, and it stayed there a long time, and I stayed wood, and Nadia stayed wood, and we let it. We let it because there was nothing else on this earth or under it that we could do, and I have carried the letting ever since, a weight with no floor in me low enough to leave it on. Then it went, sated, slow, heavy with what it had taken. The light drew back off the bay floor and poured itself down through the drains and the dead vents and back toward the spine, dimming as it went. The knock on the floor easing and slowing and falling away beneath us, down, down toward the deep. And the green of our one chemical light was the only light left in the world. And there were 2 of us against the hull, and the place where Boone had been was empty and wet and cold, and neither of us moved for a long time after even the last thin edge of the blue was gone, because our bodies had forgotten how to believe in a room without it. When the current turned, I felt it before I understood it. There came a change in the deep groan of the station, a slow easing in the way the steel was working, and I knew from 179 days of listening to that station breathe that the deep water was going back to where it belonged, cooling, settling, the season turning over the way the old logs swore it would. The thing had gone down. I did not need an instrument to tell me. I could feel the trench closing back over it like a wound over a splinter, could feel the whole weight of the sea settle into a colder and older quiet, and I understood that we had reached the far side of the thing the diver reached in 1909, the side where I was still alive and could not think why I should be, and where the man beside me was not. Nadia found my hand in the green dark, not 2 fingers laid still this time. She gripped it hard, the first hard movement either of us had made in days, and I gripped back, and the 2 of us sat there gripping each other's hands with the strength of the drowning, shaking, breathing at last in great ragged pulls that we no longer had to hide. And neither of us said Boone's name, then or for a long time after, because there was no version of saying it that the mouth could survive. We were still alive. The trench had gone back to sleep, and somewhere far above us, in a bright dry office, a proceeding was being administered, and our names were on a schedule of assets, and the machinery that would decide what happened to us next had already been set in motion by men who believed to a certainty that Trench Station 9 held nothing but cold steel and a bad quarters loss. Surviving the thing turned out to be the middle of it, not the end. I had thought, in the worst of the holding, that if the light ever went down and stayed down we would be saved, that living through the trench was the whole battle. It was not. The trench went to sleep and left us sealed alive in a dead station, 11,000 feet down, with a reserve battery I had already calculated the end of, and the second dying started the moment the first one stopped. Quieter than the light, but just as certain. The math was simple, and I had done it days before and kept it to myself. The reserve fed the scrubbers that kept the air breathable, and the reserve was nearly spent, and when it went, the air would begin its slow turn toward poison, carbon building with every breath the 2 of us took. And there would be no drama in it, no light, no drag, only a headache that got worse and a sleepiness that got heavier until it was not sleepiness anymore. I told Nadia the truth of it once the thing was down, because she had earned the truth, and because carrying the number alone had nearly broken me. "We have days," I told her, the same word I had used for the trench. Days and not many, and then the air goes bad, unless somebody comes. And she took it the way she took everything, quiet, her jaw set, and she asked the only question that mattered. "Will somebody come?" I did not know. That was the honest answer, and I gave it to her. I told her what Boone had said, that a bankruptcy court does not let a station full of salvage sit at the bottom of the sea, that there was money in the steel and the equipment and the mineral stores, and that money moves even when nothing else will, and that sooner or later a salvage crew would be hired to cut Trench Station 9 apart and haul it up for scrap. What I did not say, because there was no use in it, was that sooner or later is a wide country, that a proceeding can grind for months, that the crew who came might come long after the air in Dome 4 had turned, and that if they did, they would find 2 more assets in the wreck and note it on a form. So we waited, and we rationed, not food now, but breath. We learned to do as little as a living body can do. We lay still, not the terrible held stillness of the light, but a deep conserving quiet, moving only when we had to, speaking rarely, because talking burns air, and so does fear. We kept one chemical light going at a time, and let the dark have the rest. We drank the last of the water in careful sips. And in the long green-lit nothing, with the whole dead weight of the ocean groaning slow above us, the two of us did the only thing there was left to do, which was to keep each other on the near side of giving up. Nadia told me about her life in pieces, in the small, careful sentences the air allowed, and I told her about mine. She had a mother in a care home she called every Sunday without fail, the one fixed point in a life spent on stations and rigs, and she was more afraid of that Sunday call going unanswered, of her mother sitting by a phone that did not ring, than she was of the dying itself. I told her about Lena. I said the name out loud for the first time in that dark, and once I had said it, I could not stop, and I told Nadia the whole of it, the voicemail and the swim team and the money mailed instead of the self, all the things I had been answering silently for days while the light drifted past my face, and Nadia listened the way she listened on the radio, steady, present, and when I was done, she did not tell me it was all right, because she was not a liar. She said, "Then you have a reason to keep breathing, which is more than some people get." And she was right, and it was the truest kindness anyone offered me in that place, a hard true thing instead of a soft false one, and I have tried to be that for people since, when I can, which is not often, because I am not the man I was before the dark, and one of the things I lost down there was most of my softness. The reserve died on what I think was the 6th day sealed in. The scrubbers stopped with a small sound, a click and a fading whir, and after that there was no machine at all left running on Trench Station 9, and the air began, slow, to go against us. I felt it first as a dullness, a heaviness behind the eyes, the beginning of a headache that would not lift. Nadia felt it too. We did not talk about it. We lay in the green dark and breathed the failing air in shallow sips, and I answered the voicemail one more time, and I made Nadia a promise I did not know if I could keep, that if only one of us walked out of that station, it would be the one who could still walk, and that the one who walked would find the others' people and tell them, would find her mother and my Lena, and stand in front of them and be a voice and not a letter. And she made me the same promise back, and we shook on it in the dark with 2 hands that were both shaking now, hers and mine, from the cold and the bad air and the bottomless exhaustion of having already died once and being asked to keep dying slower. I had stopped believing anyone was coming. I had given it up, not in despair exactly, but in something quieter and more final, a settling, the way the station itself had settled under the full weight of the sea. I lay in the dark next to Nadia, and I did my breathing, and I let the headache come, and I thought about my daughter without any hope attached to the thinking anymore, just love with the hope taken out of it, which it turns out is a thing that can exist, and is very heavy, and is maybe the truest kind. And I was somewhere down in that settled place, most of the way to the bottom of it, when the station rang like a bell. It rang again, a deep-struck note that came through the whole column, metal on metal, far off and then closer, and I came up out of the settled place so fast it made me sick. Nadia's hand clamped on my arm. We lay in the dark and listened, and the sound came again, and then it resolved into what it was, which was the one sound in all the world I had stopped letting myself want. Cutting, the high whine of a salvage torch working steel, and the clank and groan of heavy gear moving in the water outside the hull, and voices, garbled and distant, carried through the metal from somewhere down the spine. A crew. A crew had come to cut Trench Station 9 apart for scrap, exactly as Boone had said they would, and they were cutting their way up toward us through the dead domes, and they had no idea on this earth that there was anything left alive above them to cut toward. We had no power to signal with, no radio, no light that would carry, nothing that drew current, and I would not have run current if I could. Some animal part of me still certain that a live circuit would call the blue back up out of the deep. So we did the only thing we had. We made noise the honest way, the old way, the way trapped men have always made it. We took up a length of steel conduit, and we beat on the hull, on the great curved wall of Dome 4, in threes, 3 and 3 and 3, over and over, throwing every bit of strength our starved and poisoned bodies had left into the ringing of it. And we stopped and we listened, and we heard the cutting go on, and we did it again. For a long time nothing changed, and I thought they could not hear us over their own machines. Thought they would cut what they had come to cut, and rig it, and haul it up, and leave the top of the station for another day, and leave us, and never know. I beat on that hole until my hand split. Nadia took over when I could not lift my arm, and I took over again when she could not lift hers. And we kept the threes going, 3 and 3 and 3. The only word we had left, the word that means a living thing, is in here. The cutting stopped. The silence after it was the worst silence of the whole ordeal, worse than the sated stillness of the light, because everything hung on it. Then a sound came back to us through the hull, a knocking. Threes, 3 and 3 and 3, struck deliberate and slow against the steel from somewhere below, a man on the other end of the dark answering us in our own word. And Nadia made a sound I had not heard her make in all our days together, and I put my split hands flat against the cold hull where the knocking came through, and I pressed my forehead to the steel, and I wept. At last, the tears I had held down for days in the presence of the light, wept them into the dark of a dome at the bottom of the sea, while a stranger with a torch knocked back to tell me I was found. They reached us the next day. It took that long to cut a safe path up the spine and to understand on their end what they were dealing with, because a salvage foreman told to scrap an empty station does not expect to find 2 live crew sealed above a lockdown seal, breathing air gone most of the way to poison. When they finally cut through into Dome 4, they came in hard suits with lights that I flinched from after so long in the green dark, and I remember the first face through the seal, a young woman with a torch, and a look on her face that I will keep as long as I keep anything, the look of a person meeting something she had been told did not exist. She had a manifest clipped to her suit. I saw it when she knelt down to me. Trench Station 9, and under it a list, and near the bottom of the list, in the same plain type as the ore stores and the reactor components and the recoverable equipment, 3 lines, 3 names: Teller, Ostrander, and mine. Each one with a small notation beside it that I was too far gone to read in that moment, but that I would come to understand too well, because it was the company's word for us. The word Aegis Deep Sea Resources had entered against our names in the schedule of the bankruptcy, the word by which the men in the bright, dry office had accounted for 3 human beings they sealed into the dark. The notation was written off. They brought us up slow, over many hours, because a body that has been at that pressure and that little air cannot be rushed to the surface without dying of the rush itself. And I lay in the salvage ship's small medical bay through the long climb and felt the weight of the ocean come off me foot by foot by foot, 11,000 feet of it lifting away. and I did not feel free of it, and I never have. Some of that weight came up inside me and stayed. Nadia was in the bunk across from mine, alive, her eyes open, and every hour or so through the climb, one of us would say the other's name into the quiet, just the name, just to have it answered. The way we had answered the knocking, 3 and 3 and 3. A living thing is in here. A living thing is still in here. The surface did not want the story, which surprised me and then did not surprise me at all. There was a stretch of days in a hospital in Anchorage that I remember in fragments, warm rooms and clean sheets, and the strange violence of ordinary light, nurses who were kind, a window with actual weather beyond it, gray and low and moving, the first sky I had seen in half a year. And into that stretch, before I could even walk a hall on my own, came the men from the company, or what was left of the company, which by then was mostly lawyers. They came with soft voices and hard papers. They were very sorry. They said the word tragedy, the way the relay voice had said the word processed, a word worn smooth from use, a word that did a job. And under the sorrow, quick, before I was strong enough to think straight, they put in front of me the papers, and the papers were a settlement. The offer was a sum of money in exchange for my silence and my signature on a page that said Aegis Deep Sea Resources admitted no fault, that the events at Trench Station 9 were an unforeseeable confluence of a natural geological event and a financial insolvency, that no living person was responsible, that I would not speak of it publicly, and that in accepting the sum, I released the company and its officers and its assigns from all claims forever. The sum was not small. In the state I was in, wrecked and poisoned and grieving and afraid, a part of me wanted to take it because the sum was a number, and a number was a thing I understood. And after everything, a part of me wanted to be handed a clean number and told that the number made it even, because they were doing it again. They had reduced Teller to a line, and Boone to a line, and Ostrander to a line. They had reduced me to a remittance and my daughter to an address, and now, having sealed me in the dark to save the cost of a rescue, they were offering to reduce the entire thing. The dark and the cold and the held breath and the sound Boone made and the empty wet place on the grating where a man had been, to one more number, a final number, a settlement, and to have me sign my name under it and agree that the number was the truth. The company's whole genius, the only genius it had, was turning people into numbers, and it had been doing it to us since before we ever felt the water turn. The trench and the company were the same animal wearing two skins. Both of them were blind. Both of them fed on what moved and could not hold still. Both of them, when they were done, left an accounting I did not sign. Nadia did not sign either, and I think each of us not signing gave the other the spine for it. I do not say it as a boast, because refusing to sign has cost me more than the money would have been worth, in years and in health and in nights, and there are cold months when I am not sure the refusing was wise, only that it was mine. The one thing in the whole of it that was mine to choose. I would not let them make it a number. That was all. It was not heroism. It was the last piece of me the trench had not taken, and I closed my hand around it and would not open my hand. The others, the pod survivors, most of them signed. I do not blame them for that either. They had families and mortgages and the long ordinary need of people to be able to close a door and move on, and the company's number let them close it. I heard, secondhand and later, what became of some of them, and mostly it was the quiet, unremarkable damage that a thing like that leaves. Marriages that did not hold, jobs that did not hold. A couple who moved somewhere sunny and far from any water. And I heard about Halbrook. Halbrook did not last. The man who had gone up in the second pod, whose key the company reached down 11,000 feet to authorize because his value showed on a sheet. The true believer, the bolt torqued to spec. Whatever he saw in my face through that closing hatch, he took it up to the surface with him, and it did not let him alone. He gave a statement to a lawyer, I was told, that did not match the statement the company wanted, and then he gave another one and somewhere in there the roof he had spent his life standing under came all the way down inside him, because a man can survive knowing the world is cruel, but not always survive knowing he was the cruelty's instrument and got saved for it. The part of what happened to Halbrook that I know, I keep. The company saved the wrong thing when it saved him. It saved the asset and lost the man, and that too was an accounting error, the same kind. The only kind they ever made, the kind that mistakes what a person is worth. Nadia and I said goodbye at the airport in Anchorage. This is a thing I have not made peace with and do not expect to. We had promised each other, in the dark, that whoever walked out would find the other's people and be a voice for them. And we had walked out together, and so the promise had softened into something we did not need. And we stood in the terminal with our 2 small bags and did not know how to be the people we had been to each other down there. Up here, in the light, with a whole world of ordinary between us again. She was going back to her mother. I was going toward Lena. We had saved each other's lives with our hands in the dark, and now we were 2 strangers at a gate, and we both felt the size of that, and neither of us could cross it. She held my hand one more time, the way she had in the green dark, and she said, "Call your girl." And I said, "Call your mother." And that was the whole of our goodbye, 2 commands, 2 kindnesses, the same shape as everything true that ever passed between us, and then she went one way and I went another, and I have not seen her since, and I think about her every single day. And I hope her mother answered the phone, and I have never once had the courage to call and find out. We had lived through the worst thing there is together, and we could not manage the walk to a gate side by side. I have never understood it, and I have stopped trying to. I called Lena from a motel outside Anchorage before I ever got on a plane, because I was afraid that if I waited until I could do it in person, I would find a reason not to. The way I had found a reason not to for 179 days, and for a good while before that. It was the middle of the afternoon where her mother answered first, and there was a silence on the line when she heard my voice, a long, careful silence, because she had gotten a call weeks before from a company that told her I was missing and presumed lost, and then no call at all correcting it, because a bankrupt company does not spend money on good news. So to her, I was a dead man on the phone. I told her I was alive. I told her a short, true version, that there had been an accident at the station, and that I had been trapped, and that I was out now and coming home. And she cried. My ex-wife, a woman who had every reason on this earth to be done crying over me, and then she did a thing I will be grateful for until I die. She did not make me earn the next part. She just said, "Hang on," and I heard her walk through a house I had never seen and call her daughter's name, and I stood in a motel room with cheap carpet and a window I had left the curtain open on, because I could not stand the closed curtain anymore and still cannot, and I waited for my daughter to come to the phone. Lena was 10 by then. She got on the line wary, the way a kid gets when the adults are being strange, and she said hello like a question, and I said her name, and I said, "It's your dad." I had spent days in the dark, building the thing I would say to her. All those silent answers to the voicemail, all the speeches, and standing there with her actual breath on the actual line, every one of them went out of my head, because they had all been written for me, to make me feel like a man who had a good reason, and she did not need any of them. So I did not make a speech. I said, "I heard your voicemail. I heard the whole thing. I'm sorry it took me so long to call you back. Tell me about the swim team." And she did. She told me about the swim team, and it is the part I would trade all the rest to keep. She was quiet and unsure for about a minute, and then something in her let go, and she just told me the strokes she was learning, and the coach she liked, and the meet coming up, and the girl in the next lane who was faster than her but not by much, and not for long. All of it coming out in that fast, proud rush I knew from the voicemail, the rush of a kid who has been waiting to tell her father a thing. And I stood in that motel room, 11,000 feet up, in the ordinary air, and I listened to every word, and I did not once look at the time, and I did not once think about anything I had to say back. I just listened, which was the whole of what she had ever needed, the thing I had been too much of a coward and too much of a company man to do, and I have gotten to do it many times since, and it is the only unqualified good thing that came up out of that trench with me. I went home. Home is a small place now, near her, not with her, because her mother and I are not going to be that story, and I have stopped wishing we were. I got a different kind of work. Land work. Dry work. The kind where the worst thing that can happen is ordinary. I see Lena regular. She is older now, and she knows a rough shape of what happened to me. Not the light. I have never told her about the light, but the accident and the company and the being trapped. And she treats me with a care that a child should not have to learn to give a parent. And that is one more thing the company took that no settlement was ever going to give back. And I have made my peace with almost none of it, and I have made my peace with getting to be her father at all, which is more than I had any right to after the way I started. The dark, though, the dark I did not get to keep my peace with. I sleep with the light on. I have since the salvage ship, and I always will, and it cannot be just any light. It has to be warm. A warm bulb, amber, the color of a lamp, the color of the surface. And I learned that the hard way in the first weeks home, because the first nightlight I bought was one of those little plug-in ones for a hallway, and it threw a soft blue-white glow along the baseboard in the dark, low down, near the floor, and I woke at 3 a.m. with my heart stopped, and my whole body turned to wood, and my mind screaming the one word, the only word, hold still, because there was a pale blue light down near the floor, and it was moving. It was only moving because my eyes were swimming with sleep and terror, but it was moving, and I lay in my own bed, in my own dry house, a mile from my daughter, and could not move a muscle for the better part of an hour, holding still against the night light, waiting for the drag, and the knock, and the cold. I threw that one away. Amber only, now. Warm only. The color of a lamp, and never the color of the deep. There are other things the trench kept in me, and I have stopped fighting most of them, and just make room. I cannot be near deep water, not the ocean, which I have not so much as looked at since Anchorage, and not a lake either, not the big cold ones with no bottom that a person can see, because standing at the edge of that much dark water puts a hand around my throat, and I have to walk back to the car. I cannot open a chest freezer without the smell of it stopping me. That cold mineral reek of things kept where the light does not reach, and so I do not own one, and I buy my food in small amounts like a man who does not trust the future to be there, which I suppose I am. Any wet dragging sound, a hose pulled across a garage floor, a wet towel dropped from a height, a mop, will turn me to stone for a second before my mind catches up and hands me back the ordinary world. And a slow knock, a deep one, a furnace, kicking on in a quiet house at night, the pipes settling, will do the same, will drop into the old rhythm of that pulse in the floor, and make my whole body remember before I do. The company died, and did not die. That is the truest thing I know about it, and it is what keeps me up on the nights the amber light is not enough. Aegis deep-sea resources dissolved in the proceeding. Its name is gone. But a company is not a name. A company is the animal underneath the name. The accounting animal, the one that turns people into numbers and eats what moves and cannot hold still. And that animal does not die in a bankruptcy court. It sheds the name the way a snake sheds a skin. And it is out there right now, under a new one, incorporated fresh and clean. And I saw it once. A small item in the news. A new venture. Deep-sea minerals. A bright future, backed by some of the same money, and I did not read past the first line. I did not have to. I know the animal. I lived in its belly for 180 days, and it is still hungry, and it will always be hungry, and it is blind. Blind as the thing in the trench, blind as the men in the bright office, and it feeds the same way on the same thing. And somewhere tonight there is a crew at the bottom of somewhere with a number on each of them and a clock built to get them up and out before the coverage changes. and most nights that crew will make it, because the clock is a cheap thing to run when nobody ever has to fix it. I go to Lena's swim meets. It is where I am now, most true, the both of me at once. She swims for her high school. She is good, better than good. The girl in the next lane a long way back now, and I go to every meet I can drive to. And I sit in the bleachers of those big, echoing pool buildings with the smell of chlorine and the roar of parents, an ordinary man among ordinary men, a father watching his daughter do the thing she called to tell me about on a phone I did not answer. And the pools are lit from below. They light the water from underneath in those places, so the whole pool glows. And the color it glows is a pale blue, a cold pale blue, the exact blue, the one blue. And the first time I walked into that building and saw it, I nearly went down. I stood in the doorway with my ticket in my hand, and the whole vast wall of pale blue water in front of me, moving, lit from within. And every animal part of me that is older than my thinking mind told me to hold still, to become furniture, to give it nothing that moved, because the cold light had found me, had followed me up 11,000 feet, and across all the dry years, and into the one bright room I loved most in the world, and was waiting in the water for the twitch of me. I did not run. I have gotten good at not running. I found my seat, and I sat down in the pale blue light, and I put my hands flat on my knees, and I held still, and my daughter came out onto the blocks in her cap and her goggles, and she found me in the stands the way she always does, and she lifted one hand, and I lifted mine, slow, the smallest motion I could make, and the horn went, and she dove into the cold blue water and became a thing of speed and joy and the exact color of the thing that ate, the man who saved my life. And I sat in the light. I cannot escape and will never escape. And I watched her, and I did not move. And I loved her with my whole held still body, and the water glowed, and she swam, and I stayed.